Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today, I will be presenting about the construction economics on the topic of cost planning. So we look at an introduction of the cost planning itself. So the use of the term cost planning starts from the inception stage of the project until the project is handed over to the construction. In other words, cost planning starts from the beginning of the stage of the project, from the first stage of the project until the project is handed over to the client. So the post-contract is known as cost control stage, while pre-contract is known as cost planning stage. So these two terms, cost planning and cost control, often overlap and used simultaneously throughout the construction project. Cost planning is actually a system that requires total coordination from the beginning of the stage of the project until the project is handed over to the construction, and also involve a systematic framework procedure and demands high commitment from the design team. Talking about a construction project, we'll often come across these three terms: quality, time, and cost. So the client will always want a short period of time of the construction, limited cost, cheaper cost, but demand a high quality of end product. So to achieve the equilibrium of these three terms, cost, time, and quality, it actually demands high commitment from the design team, i.e. the architecture, engineer, and also the QS. So moving to the next slide, what are the purpose of the cost planning? First is to ensure that the client receive value for money. As I mentioned before, the client will always aim for the value for money, whether worth it or not, the building or the end product to the client. And talking about the construction project, it is not necessary to have a lower cost of building. There must be a balance between quality, cost, and also time. So these will include usage, suitability, initial cost, and also life cycle cost for the entire lifespan of the element and also buildings. Second is to ensure that both client and designer are aware of the implication of their decision on cost. So every decision making will give implication to the cost of the project. Next is to provide advice to the designer to enable him to design within the budget of the client itself, and to ensure that the tender sum could be within the budget of the client as stipulated in the project brief from the beginning of the stage of the project. So these will avoid the risk of turnover of the client. So last but not least, what are the methods in cost planning? It can be divided into two: elemental cost planning and also comparison cost planning. So elemental cost planning is cost planning by element, also cost target plan, while the comparison cost planning is cost planning by comparatively and also referred as costing to a design. So we look at the elemental cost planning. So elemental cost planning is a system of cost planning and cost control used simultaneously, typically for buildings, which enable the cost for a scheme to be monitored during design development. Elemental cost planning is often referred to as design to a cost or target cost planning, since cost limit is fixed for the scheme and the architect must then prepare a design not to exceed this cost. In other words, the architect will design within the cost limit fixed by the client. So elemental cost planning should ensure that the tender amount is close as possible to the first estimate. Any likely differences between the two is anticipated within a reasonable range, and also should ensure that money available for a project is allocated consciously and economically to the various components and also finishes. And the most important thing, should aim to achieve good value for money. As I mentioned before, the client will always aim for good value for money. So the target is the key factor in elemental cost planning. So the designer must offer design which will fit the cost limit fixed by the client. So moving to the next method, what is a comparative cost planning? So the object is to achieve economy of design by investigating a range of design proposal and establishing a combination of element design which best meet the client requirements for standard or etc. Also known as pricing according to design, where cost plan are prepared according to design that have been made or selected by the client. So usually in the comparative cost planning, the architect will design more than one alternative and the client will choose based on his requirement. So different design will give different cost implication. So this is the example of sketches for comparative cost planning. So moving to the next slide, phases involved in the preparation of the cost planning. Mainly there are three main phases involved. Phase 1, establishing cost target. Moving to the phase 2, cost plan, and phase 3, cost check, whereby the QS will check whether the cost is within the cost limit fixed by the client. So these are 12 work stages in the RIBA, starting from A to L, from inception to feedback. In other words, from the beginning of the project, from the commencement of work until the completion. So inception is whereby the client prepare project brief based on his requirement. And then moving to feasibility study, the study of site location, financial, design, and etc. And then the architect will produce an outline proposal based on the concept proposed by the client. And then architect will produce a scheme design and also detail design. The QS will come out and produce a BQ or bill of quantities. And moving to the tender action, where the tendering process occur, and then project planning and also on-site operation, whereby the contractor commence the work on site, and then lastly is completion and also feedback. So phase 1, establishing cost target. So the main objective in this stage is to prepare a prelim estimate, usually by the QS, that is the cost target and also a realistic cost limit fixed by the client. So when the cost limit and information from the client have been agreed upon, then only the organizational decision and design are made. So the figures calculated must be realistic, reasonable, that is total must be sufficient to complete project that caters to all clients' requirement and needs. So a term realistic here means accurate, reasonable, realistic, and also reliable, and also practical. So phase 1 covers stage A and B in RIBA plan of work. It means in inception and also in feasibility study. So moving to the phase 2, cost plan. So the main objective at this stage is to plan and also to determine how estimate should be allocated among the parts or element of a building. So this is to avoid any shortage of fund or capital during the construction period. So the cost plan has to be provided and prepared based on estimate and the client brief. And the cost plan is important to ensure that overall cost does not exceed the cost limit fixed by the client. So the cost plan helps to provide quality buildings within the limited budget, but it's not designed to produce the cheapest building. So need to take into consideration in terms of quality of the building. So this is the last phase, phase 3, cost check. So the main objective at this stage is to secure original design for elements that can be built based on the cost plan and design which have been prepared within the cost limit of the client. And the architect will produce a detailed design, and the cost checks must be done after all parties in the said project have agreed upon the cost plan. So when each element is designed, the draft drawing and specs notes have been given to the QS for cost check. So usually QS will do the cost check to ensure that the cost of the building is within the cost limit fixed by the client. The QS will compare the cost check to the cost plan and also prepare a regular report. So the cost check method often employed by the QS is the approximate quantities method. So RIBA stage evolve. Phase 3 is in stage E by referring to RIBA plan of work. So that's all. Some brief information about the cost planning. That's all for me. Assalamualaikum.